Welcome. You are listening to Our Mindful Nature, formerly titled The Mindful Minute. I'm your host, Marisela and I, and this podcast explores the deep connection between land and self through nature-based meditations and meditative experiences that invite us back into belonging to each other, to our ancestors, to the earth, and to all beings that make up this universe. If you would like to access these meditation practices as standalone audio files, please subscribe to my newsletter at mariselarnett.com. It's free, and you'll receive a new mini meditation each week, along with behind-the-scenes content and bonus material for each podcast episode. All right, grab a cup of tea, pop in your headphones, and find a comfy seat. Let's settle in for today's episode. Hello, my friends, and welcome. Okay, so last week we began a new meditation series devoted to exploring the edges, both in the natural world as well as in our internal landscape. And today's interview and meditation practice really furthers this exploration for us. Today, I am joined by Marisela B. Gomez. Marisela is a community activist, a public health professional, and a physician scientist. She's co-founder of Village of Love and Resistance in Baltimore, Maryland, organizing for power, healing, and the reclamation of land. She's a meditation and Buddhist teacher and a student of the late Zen master Thich Nhat. She recently co-authored a new book, Healing Our Way Home, Black Buddhist Teachings on Ancestors, Joy, and Liberation. In today's episode, Marisela and I talk about the edges and the intersections of contemplative practice, community care, and social justice. We talk about the role of love, both in practice and in action. We talk about the misconceptions of self-care and how and why our spiritual or our contemplative practice is vital for the healing of the planet and all beings. At the end, Marisela guides a beautiful meditation, inviting us to explore and soften around our internal edges. I really hope you'll listen all the way through. Join me for today's practice. It is so powerful. And without any further ado, why don't we jump right into today's conversation? Well, such a delight and pleasure to get to sit with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat today on Our Mindful Nature.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here with you, Meryl, and being in practice together, which is whenever I'm in a space where we start off together by breathing together, it feels like we're in practice together.
I love that. And I really find, Zoom asks a very particular kind of listening to me. And it feels really important to me to sort of invite all of us, each of us listeners, for you too, to land in this space together where our senses are awake and our hearts are open and we're able to just connect. So thank you for that. Marisela, you have the most incredible bio. I was reading and I was like, oh my gosh, it's beautiful. You have so much experience, such a wide range. And I'd love if maybe you would tell us a little bit about yourself, the work that you do in the world, your contemplative practice and what drew you there and who you are. Start with a big question.
Yeah, those are really big and also simple for me. I think in my life I've always been called to I guess some people would say truth seekers. I'm on the truth seeker path, meaning everything has been a bit underpinned with trying to understand the most authentic way to be in the world, to bring out that self that I think we all have, which is this this true self that wants to do good and be kind and love and be loved. I think we all it's the deepest aspiration in all of us. For some people, we think no way because of the way they may show up, and yet that is the thing we have in common with all humans. Um, so for me, I started in the Air Force actually, um, simply because straight out of high school, 17 years old, I didn't want to go to college, um, and also in the South, Louisiana, I had a partial scholarship to a college. I don't even remember anymore. All I remember, I mean, the city. All I remember that it was a very white city or town that I probably wouldn't do well in, and so chose not to go and joined the Air Force, and quickly learned in the Air Force that just in the this body that I'm in this lifetime, the form just kept treated a certain way. And I think I realized quickly that in order to try to shift this dynamic, I needed to get some education. And so I went from someone who didn't want to go to college to someone who couldn't stop going to university, and ended up double timing it in my 4-year enlistment, making a promise to myself to finish an undergrad, and then went on to um, do a couple master's degree, and then a PhD, and then an MD. So for someone who, started out of high school without any intention to really go to college, I wasn't one of those kids who was always aspiring, being coached. Now like kids are like taught how to interview for. It's a very different world. But really just wanting to be okay and safe in the world and have food, shelter, and clothing, which was what the Air Force offered me. But it wasn't just, it showed me that it had to be more, just to get that one had to really struggle, and so education for me, and it had to do with my mother also, always trying to instill in my head that your way out of poverty and into anything else was going to be through education. But I didn't get it until I was in the Air Force. And so then it really kicked in, and just headed into the sciences, laboratory medicine, and then toxicology and immunopharmacology, and then medical school, and then public health. So what I find when I look back on my trajectory is starting with the basic things on the cellular level and the DNA level, actually, in the lab, and then each time feeling like in each kind of area of the trajectory, feeling it wasn't I wasn't engaging with people enough, and feeling that this is good to understand how cells work, how DNAs replicate, and what about on the human level, and going into finally, medicine, where you're engaging with individuals, to public health, where you're engaging with the larger population and figuring out, understanding how do you bring good health to the largest on that population level. So starting in the lab on the, very small level with the DNA, also to bring good health, right? Because you do these research projects to benefit the world, but then getting each time, I think, feeling some frustration that one needed to get bigger. But the whole time was really seeking a way to help others and to bring something good into the world, healing into the world. So now now you might say, well, I do work in actually rebuilding communities, especially in historically redlined Black low income communities. communities with when we say redlining, it means communities that have been historically disinvested for 100 years or segregated. And these communities still live this legacy. Today, there's still about 80% of redline communities from the 1930s are still segregated and still low income. And so I work in these communities in understanding and figuring out how do we rebuild these communities in a way that's healthy, and how do we build leadership, and how do people in these communities become the ones who determine how their communities are going to be rebuilt, how they're going to heal themselves from this historic trauma and generational trauma, and how do they build connections again? The understanding of healing the fragmentation that is the result of this trajectory of segregation, and this is really a public health issue because the health of our communities that are segregated are some of the worst health indicators in the country. Actually, for some places, say in Baltimore, a few years ago, the health indicators compared to some of the lowest income countries in the world. So we in some of our more disinvested communities, we actually have very challenging health and economic and social issues. So all these determinants, the socioeconomic determinants, the political determinants, they affect the health on a population level. And so the work I do now is connected to how do we rebuild communities that are healthy and whole. So for me, even though some people say, well, you got a PhD in immunopharmacology, like, what are you doing with that in the work you're doing? And I say it's still the same thing. It's all about understanding in every level, how do we contribute to the best in a person and in a community? How do you create communities and help create communities that are whole and healthy? And you can do it anywhere. You can do it from the smallest cellular level, or you could do it on the bigger policy level. And so I feel like this has really been my trajectory, and my path into mindfulness is really, I feel like I've been doing the work of healing for a long time. Buddhism for me has been helping me understand love as a really big necessity in healing, and love as really the internal aspect of all the healing, whether it's in a big public way or in a small private way. Buddhism and mindfulness practice, this path has really helped me bring a layer of self-healing, self-understanding, self-love that actually, in my understanding now, a recognition that without keeping love at the center of everything, the healing is not going to be sustaining. It's not going to last. And whether I do it on a personal level or a population level, love has to be at the center of it. We can't hate the injustice, the people who bring the injustice. We may hate the outcome of injustice, the segregation, the disparities, but we can't hate the people who have been part of that system. Even though they created the system, there's a way that we still have to figure out how to love them and find a way to move through forgiveness and restore this human connection, even if the person doesn't understand, the person causing harm doesn't understand that really is what justice is. Dr. King said, what did he say? Justice is love correcting that which revolts against love. And so that really, actually, it's like my mantra, because I do, my work is primarily work in social justice settings. Um, and that's how I see it now, is this is really all about love. Um, it's just that it's on a population level, and but as long as I keep love at the center, um, I'm good. When I go off because something might be so horrible, or I think, like, what possesses someone to behave in this way, or say this thing, or build a structure or legislate a policy that inevitably will result in discrimination, then this practice really is what holds me in saying, this person really suffers. What is it in their trajectory that has resulted in them thinking, being, feeling, acting in this way, and being able to have a little more understanding, so I can stay in compassion instead of going to hatred or um, non-forgiveness.
Thank you so much for that answer. I love that you brought love right into the beginning. We are connected today to talk about your new book, Healing Our Way Home, Black Buddhist Teachings on Ancestors' Joy and Liberation. And the section that energetically leapt out at me more than any other was the section that had that quote from Dr. King that you just shared. And I mentioned that I'm bringing this conversation into thematically a month of talking about edges. And to me, I think I'm going to call it a false edge. And I'm very open to you feeling differently about that. But what I have noticed is a tendency to view our contemplative practice, our mindfulness practice, and our activism or not engagement with activism as two very different things. And what I read in your writing and what I feel in my practice is that they're one and the same thing. And I really want to name that as a piece as we explore maybe a little bit of this concept of centering love in the practice as we talk about social justice, as we talk about our activism in the world, social, political, our engagement. I'm very curious your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. In the last years, I'd say I don't know, 5 years, maybe even longer, but what we're seeing more, I'm sure you're seeing this too, is more discussions, more teachings about just what you said. How do we merge contemplative practice with justice work, right? It's almost a thing, I might say, just especially compared to in the past, when I remember feeling there wasn't a space to really share that it's really they're not separate, like wanting to say they're not separate, y'all. This is the work of love. And more now I see we're bringing that, and there's many things out now speaking directly to it requires it requires a level of deep contemplation in order to stay grounded in anything we do, right? And particularly in the work of justice, because when we talk about the work of justice, what we're saying is we're really talking about making sure we don't have unjust societies, where whatever the politic is, whether it's racial politic or gender politic or class or immigrant or sexual orientation or whatever it is, right? Land taking, right? We're really talking about very difficult situations of violation. And so where else do we not, I mean, when you think about it, where are the places that require more love, more reflection, more contemplation, if not a place where there is violence? Because violence is the opposite of love. So if we're stepping in justice work, if we're about this work of justice, it means we're about this work of as Dr. King says, correcting that which is revolting against love. That's what we're doing. And what that looks like is violation of love, right? It's violation of the things that we say bring us together, the things that offer kindness for each other, the things that connect us in our humanity, our common um, uh, 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 aspiration of what I said earlier, truth seeking, of being the best we can in society, right? And so to think that we wouldn't require some practice, whether it's contemplative or other type of spiritual practice, a practice that grounds us, a practice that, and what I often say is, I don't care what your practice is, but you have to have a practice. Actually, you really need a practice that keeps bringing you back to what are you bringing into the space? Have you investigated what are your places that need healing so that you don't replicate a harm that has been perpetuated against yourself by not seeing that it hasn't been healed yet. We can relive those things in different ways externally. When something happens, we need to not conflate a reaction that has nothing to do nothing to do with us. It has to do with something that just happened, but because we haven't looked deeply and healed that thing in us, that history, that trauma, we risk conflating something that's happening today with something that happened for us 20 years ago. And in so doing, we can really miss the point of what it is we're supposed to be doing in that place. And the thing that moves us into knowing who we are bringing into a place is really a contemplative practice, a practice of spirituality. Whether, I tell people, okay, you do you journal, you do yoga, you draw, you paint, you run, you whatever, you plant seeds that bloom beautifully, whatever it is that takes you to the place where you're present in the moment with what is there, and you're able to see yourself in that moment and notice yourself, how you're responding to something. What are my habits? That allows us then to show up in a way that we've been doing that homework, we've been doing our reflection, we've been doing our healing. And so then we show up, and what we bring is more spaciousness. A healed self is not a self that is stuck and rigid and contracted around pain and things that we haven't healed yet. And so naturally, we're bringing a body, a heart that's more open, eyes that are more open, and so we can hold the things, the difficulties in these spaces of injustice that we're trying to remedy. I think when you speak to some of the elders, say from the African American Civil Rights Movement, and you ask what was missing, right? What do you think could have been different? You'll hear some say, we needed to have more reflection. We needed to have more time to stop and just like take care of ourselves. So I think if we look at some of the social movements and justice work, the justice work in different countries, the ones that maybe have been more sustained, or at least have built something and maybe have something else built on it and to continue it, would be the ones where people really had some sort of practice with them. When Thich Nhat Hanh talks about Vietnam and the war and being bombed over and over, villages that were being bombed, and then they would rebuild it, and then they would get bombed again, and then they'd rebuild it, and then like that. And what did they do to sustain themselves? They practiced mindfulness. They had a day of mindfulness every week. So no matter what was happening, there was a day of, meditation, mindful eating together, silence, so that people could come back to themselves and take care of themselves and be present for the the fact that even in the midst of this difficulty, I have breath. I have a food to eat. I have family. I have friends. So being able to grasp the natural things that are there that we may miss because we're so caught up in the thing at hand, the urgency of the task, the project. So I think there's examples to show how when we struggle and we have a practice, a contemplative practice, a practice of spirit, a practice of reflection, it helps us sustain us, and it helps us stay with some peace within our bodies and mind. Peace in ourselves, peace in the world, right? We can't be like out there fighting for justice and like be the angriest, causing harm with our words. The person is causing harm and we're cursing them out. And I mean, cursing people or violent with violent words, we're not helping the situation. In that moment, it might make us feel like we're doing something good because we're like getting back at them. But Gandhi said, an eye for an eye, everybody gets blind. It's not the solution. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if you might have any thoughts on, I notice almost a binary between perceived self-care in practice like this and social activism or collective care. I'll say collective care perhaps. And I find that the invitation is that those are not two separate, collective care and self-care are not two separate things. Our invitation in this practice is that this is one and the same. This is all the same. I think it goes right back to your comment on centering love. I'm curious how you see that self-care showing up in practice versus and or with collective care.
Yeah, I think we're on a self-care train right now, right?
Yes, we are.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're an interesting society, United States, right? Because we take everything and we just do it. And I feel like that's where we're at with self-care right now. It's like become a thing, and then we're just like all in it. And I think there are some spaces where we're also hearing self-care without collective care. What you're mentioning is really not what we're talking about either. And so like the middle way is what I hear you mentioning, is we certainly need self-care. This way of, it's what I'm saying is we have to take care of ourselves. We have to, Valerie uses the word self-regard. And she uses that word specifically because self-care is kind of just, everywhere. And so trying to really bring some attention to like, what does it really mean? So this taking care, this having self-regard, what do I need now to take care of myself? This is happening today. Maybe I need to take a rest in the middle of the day. So having clarity around that, and in service of the collective, right?
Yeah.
Service of the collective. So I think if we're in remembrance of the connection and not losing sight of the interconnectedness, so it's not self-care for this like, oh, let me just go veg out for whatever, and it's in mindfulness of, I'm doing this and taking good care of myself so that when I show up, I'm more present. I have more spaciousness. I'm just like I was saying, there's a meeting later and there's a lot going on. I need to be able to be there and be solid, right?
Mhm.
So when we all do it, or we try to do it, we know we're going to a meeting where there's going to be a lot of stuff. I know what I do. I try to have a short sit, or I try to do some stretching on my body, or I go for a walk. Or I might be going to a meeting where there's going to be a lot of like chaos. I might walk to that meeting instead of driving, because I want to take each step mindfully and come back to myself, so that when I show up there, I'm more present, I'm more grounded and rooted. So I think the care of ourselves, where we're really staying connected with the larger picture, is the part where um, we might want to talk about more,
Mhm.
in how they connect. Um, and then the collective care, right? So being in community together, like Volar, we do wellness circles, and we'll
Will you
have,
tell
oh,
listeners what Valar is? Excuse me for interrupting.
yes. Oh, no, no, sorry. So I mentioned doing work rebuilding communities. So I'm a co-founder of a nonprofit organization called Village of Love and Resistance.
Mm.
VALAR is a acronym for it. We're in East Baltimore, the eastern part of Baltimore City, in a very low income and historically segregated community, a Black community. And what we're doing is rebuilding. We purchased 2 buildings. We're rebuilding these 2 buildings into a housing cooperative, affordable housing cooperative, and the other building, the church building, it will be a community hub.
Mm.
And so, as we're doing our renovations, we're organizing and building a base of community residents to participate, to heal, and to learn financial literacy, so they can co-own the building with us. So we do wellness circles, and we do community acupuncture, and we do mindfulness, and we do some vegan food, sometimes vegetarian food, to bring other ways of consuming
Mhm.
community, Zumba. So this focus on wellness, and that we can do this wellness in the collective, that we
Mm.
can come together and heal. And this is a community that's basically this is a social justice organization, right? So, you might say, well, why are you doing wellness circles? Well, because they're important for, as we were just saying, the collective self-care, the collective and the self-care, they go together, right? So I think the reason that we know we need to do healing circles with the community is because we've been doing our own healing journey, and we see that um, as we heal together, it's also part of moving forward. So we don't want to just go over there and heal, but then no one else is participating in healing. And so sometimes healing collectives, um, it brings that into the space, and so people can understand. Oh wow, this is how I feel after taking this time to just sit. And this is what we hear from our residents too: is yeah, I feel more calm, I feel more relaxed, right? And so maybe that person will go home and breathe for 5 minutes, or introduce their children when they're getting upset to just sitting and taking 3 breaths in and 3 breaths out.
Mhm.
And so that's why it's not separate, right? They're very much inter ours, as we say. They're together.
Mm. This conversation is such a gift, and I am really sitting with that missing piece in service of, at the end of, self-care or self-regard. That it's that connective bridge. I feel like that perhaps we're not saying enough out loud. So I'm really grateful that you said that. Thank you. I wonder, in the book, so you write about all of this in the book, along with practices and importance of connecting with our ancestors, practices of joy, their playlists and recipes in the book. There's so many beautiful practices. And I wondered if maybe you would share a brief practice with us today that we can sit with. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'd love to share a practice on the edges, on our internal edges, and a way um, to practice with that in a very mundane way that we can bring into our daily lives. So I'll use this bell as we call a bell of mindfulness, and I'll invite it. And really, it's just to sort of mark time, and then also to bring us back to our breath. So I invite 3 bells, sounds of the bell to begin, and then at the end, I'll invite 2 sounds. And what I invite you to do is, with each sound of the bell, to take a breath in and to take a breath out. The invitation is to come back to this body. And to do so, we can use our breath. So the breath's always here. We're going to focus on the breath coming in right now, the one that's coming in right now, not the one that went away, not the one that's coming next, but the one that's breathing our body right now. So noticing our breath coming in through the nose. Maybe it goes into the chest region, maybe into the belly for some. If not, that's fine. Whatever your breath is just right. And then following the breath as it leaves the body, in the same trajectory, maybe from the stomach, maybe from the chest, and making its way out the nose. And just like that, just following this breath coming in, breathing in. I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, knowing I'm breathing out. And then I'd like to invite us to practice with an area in the body that we might be feeling a little bit of tension with, maybe a tightness or maybe a little pain. Nothing major, something, maybe a recent area of tension. We're going to just bring our awareness to that area. Maybe it's a shoulder that sometimes, if we use it too much, it starts to remind us it's there. Or a back area, or a knee area, or the head. So not dropping in very firmly, just gently bringing the breath to that area, gently. Let's notice the characteristics of the area. Maybe it has a color for you. Maybe it has a shape. For some, it may have an odor. Maybe there's a vibration. Just getting familiar with this area that might be in tension. Maybe there's a temperature, maybe it's warm or hot, or maybe it's cold. Then I invite you to notice the periphery of this area. Maybe the edges of this area. Is there an edge to it? Is there a place where you notice it isn't there anymore? That whatever that tension is, that color, that shape is there a place where it sort of loses its boundary? So if it's the shoulder, maybe we're noticing from that point of tension, and we're letting ourselves notice as it moves away, maybe outward from there. So noticing where it's not there anymore. And then as we cross over that edge, if you will, notice the characteristics of the area outside of that edge of tension. And feel free to move your awareness further away from that boundary, that tension. So it doesn't need to be right adjacent. It can move further away, and then the invitation is to notice that area. What is it? What's the sensation there? What does it feel like? Maybe there's a color. Is it the same color or a different color as the area of tension? Is it a different shape, this area outside? Maybe there's a different odor. For some of us, we're more sensitive to odor. Maybe it's a different temperature. Maybe it's a different vibration. For some of us who are more sensitive to vibratory sensations. So we're just exploring that right here in this body, right adjacent to each other, is an awareness of this area of spaciousness, maybe of openness, maybe what we're calling the non-tension area. And we're noticing the different sensation in this area. And we're fully present for it. We're fully present for this non-tension area. Meaning we're dropping into what is it? What does it feel like in this body? Is it soft? Is it more open? Does it maybe feel a little more friendly? And then continue your exploration with this area of what we'll call openness, this area of spaciousness. And then explore it move your exploration toward what you might call that edge we defined earlier. The edge where we started noticing the non-tension. And just notice it. Notice the fact that there is this other area besides the tense area, right there. And maybe there's an invitation for this friendliness area to befriend this area of tension. What does that mean? Maybe it's just this acknowledgement that this area of friendliness and spaciousness is right there next to this area of tension, right there. It's like a friend who just sits and listens when you need them to. That's what this area of friendliness is doing. It's just sitting right next to this area of tension and just listening, being a good friend. You might say it's taken care of. And if we sit long enough with this area, staying with our awareness of this area, we might notice that those edges aren't so clear anymore. In fact, when we get really subtle, we might even notice that there's little pockets of that spaciousness right in the middle of the area of tension. It's not so demarcated. It's not so separate. It's actually interconnected. And we can continue to allow our mindfulness, our awareness to notice the spaciousness in the areas of tension. Not pushing, not pulling, not judging, simply noticing and not trying to make it bigger. Really just bringing our awareness to what's already there. As we come toward the end of our meditation, we can breathe in and bring that breath energy into that area that we've been in awareness with, into the area. And just notice as the breath moves into that area, the breath energy. Notice how it moves through that area of perceived separation, perceived edge between tension and no tension. Allowing the breath to be the soothing balm, this refreshing energy, which doesn't discriminate. It just moves into both areas. It cares for both areas. It doesn't distinguish. Because it's really just one body. We close our meditation with 3 breaths in together, coming back to our breath, coming in the body with a breath in, leaving the body with a breath out. And twice more like that on our own.
Marisela, thank you so much. Such a beautiful practice. I appreciate your time and your presence today.
Well, thank you so much, Meryl. I appreciate being together and having this conversation and sharing breath together. Absolutely.
Same. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Our Mindful Nature. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or leaving me a review wherever you get your podcasts. It helps others to find this show, and let's face it, we could all use a few more meditators in our lives. Our Mindful Nature is recorded on Muskogee land and produced with the support of Brianna Nielsen. Deep gratitude is offered to acoustic ecologists Gordon Hempton and Nick McMahon for the use of their nature field recordings in many of these episodes. To join my live classes, ask questions, or learn about my teacher trainings, please visit marilarnett.com. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next week.